We're good to go? Okay. Meeting's called to order. Lindsay, is it, Lindsay, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chairperson Phil Goldstein,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Marty Jost,
Here.
Commissioner Tom Wood. Here. Commissioner Wendy Newland. Here. Commissioner Mike Lewis,
Here.
and Commissioner Michael Lowry. Here. Thank you.
All right. Amendments to the agenda. Anybody have any amendments to the agenda? Got myself off track already. That's not a good sign. No amendments to the agenda. Okay. The two administrative items, the first one is determination of alternate voting. Michael Lowry voted last time, right? So Mike Lewis will vote this evening. Next, the eagerly awaited chairperson and vice chairperson elections annually. I always get this wrong, procedurally, but I'll start off by saying Marty and I are only too willing to serve again, but I understand I'm to open it up for anybody else that would like to sit in this seat. If they do, they can start tonight if they like for this lengthy agenda. Is there anybody else that like to be considered chair, vice chair? Okay, with that, then we have to have nominations. I don't get this opportunity to make the motion initially, but I would move to elect Marty Jost as vice chair for another term. I have a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
And then we need a nomination for chairman.
I hereby nominate Phil Goldstein as chairman.
Oh, I have a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I appreciate it. I suspect nobody else wants to do this. So I feel but I'll accept it for what it is. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Public comment. This is open public comment. This is an opportunity for anybody that wishes to speak on something that is not on the agenda. And by the way, this is on business items 6A and 6B, correct, Chad? There is public comment on the two business items. Has anybody signed up to speak on general public comment, Lindsay?
Yes, we do have Mr. Dennis Stricata, who has chosen to speak.
Dennis, if you could, it looks like the microphone is on. If you could state your name and address, please, and keep your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name, again, is Dennis Stricota. I'm a homeowner and resident of Timnath and reside at 5051 Brule Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly about the agenda item that's not on tonight, but will be, I'm sure, later. That's the proposed 160-unit multifamily apartment building to be built at the northwest intersection of Stonefly Drive in Timnath Trail Road. I live within several blocks of that development. There was a neighborhood meeting held by the developer on this on May 2nd. They made a presentation, and there were a lot of questions that were asked and answered. Suffice it to say, most of the attendees indicated that when they purchased houses within the neighborhood, they were led to believe that the development would be senior housing. I won't speak to that larger issue, but have some very specific suggestions for the commission, considering that this proposal will likely be approved. One, I would suggest that the commission require town planning staff, if they haven't already, assess the financial viability of the developer to undertake and sustain the proposed project. As a former city finance director, I'm aware that it is good practice to make these assessments to ensure that the project will never fail before, during, and after construction. I'm assuming the town has information on the parent company, if one exists, and its relationship with the limited liability company, Timnath Living LLC, the project owner, and what are the parent company's fiduciary responsibilities should the LLC not remain a viable entity. Second, I would suggest that the commission request the town council to take steps to mitigate the traffic impacts of this project. Since the traffic generated by this project will increase traffic backups as well as raise bicycle and pedestrian safety concerns to and from Harmony Road, especially during rush hours, I would suggest the Planning Commission should ask the town council to take and fund measures to implement street modifications or improvements to reduce traffic backups as part of its approval of the project. Included in these measures could be the implementation of no parking restrictions on Stonefly Drive adjacent to development, and if necessary, issuance of residential parking permits to neighbors within the area. Third, I would suggest the commission require the development to install and maintain stormwater filters to reduce pollution and slow runoff. Apparently, the retention area for the project will be reduced due to the town's requirements for parking spaces. As a result, the pollution emitted from these facilities will flow directly to other stormwater retention areas downstream in the neighborhood, exposing those areas to additional pollution and water flow. Although these suggestions don't begin to address the larger issues and concerns raised by the neighborhood, hopefully it will address in some small way other concerns voiced by the neighbors and perhaps restore some faith that the town shares their concerns. Thank you for your interest and attention.
Thanks, Dennis. And I took some notes, although I believe this will, much of that will be, if not all, will be captured in the minutes. Thank you. Anybody else signed up for general public comment? No, hearing none. Very good. I will close the general public comment. The consent agenda consists solely of the approval of the March 19th, 2024 meeting minutes. Commissioners, any additions or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is approved unanimously. Business, we have two business items tonight. As I mentioned, there is public comment, and we'll take those separately. Chad, one brief mention. It wasn't not necessarily for discussion. I do want to mention and recognize at the work session that council had 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, Commissioners Wood and Newland and I attended that at council's invitation. Our contribution, if you will, to that, for lack of a better word, was only a suggestion that there be some consideration of the 500-foot notice rule. And the mayor did acknowledge that that was going to get discussed. So we understand there's going to be, they ran out of time. They ran right up against the council meeting and never got to what was obviously one of the more important issues, never fully understood the oil and gas regulations were on there too. The presentation was made and they never got around to discuss it, and presumably maybe there was some other things. So it's my understanding that from the mayor and staff that will come back around and there'll be an opportunity for them to consider that. So certainly want to recognize the other commissioners who thought that was a good idea to put that on the agenda. We certainly heard from residents of late that why not expand that in some fashion. So, and it also came up during as I know from the campaign in several contexts, several of the candidates mentioned that in general or specifically. So we think it is something good, but we understand it'll come back around to council, and perhaps we'll get some guidance. We may find out that council doesn't support it, in which case our die is cast. But we're deferring discussion on that tonight, unless that's okay with you all. And any other questions on this before we turn it over to Chad?
Well, we're deferring it. Notice?
Well, we're not putting it on our agenda tonight to discuss it, given that council hasn't discussed it, but we'll bring it up at a subsequent. Any idea when they will hold that next work session?
Yeah, so that work session will be on the 28th. So if you all want to attend that one as well, and Phil, you are correct that that work session is going to be solely to talk about oil and gas regulations, then also kind of tie in the noticing distance requirement that you were talking about. So yeah, Marty, it's not for consideration tonight or at council meetings, just because there wasn't a discussion on what those regs would look like. And council wanted some more insight information on them, which we as staff have been doing, which we'll present to them on the 28th. So then at a future date before you all will be oil and gas regs and any other modifications to the
Okay.
code that might come up.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we get to discuss it here.
Yes, you will.
First.
Yeah, you'll still get to discuss it. It'll just go to a work session on the 28th with council. And then just a meeting or two afterwards, it'll come back before you all for a new amendment to the
Okay.
land use code.
By the way, I appreciate Carolyn Steffel, the town attorney, being here tonight. There were several things that came up and during the meeting that she was able to pass judgment on, and I'll try and recall those as they go along, but appreciate you being here as well.
Yeah, no problem. Let me know what questions you have.
All right, thank you. Chad, I'll turn it over to you. Business item 6A, Land Use Code Amendment number 14.
I'm going to actually kick that one off, Phil.
Thank you.
So thanks, Chairperson, Planning Commission members. Phil, as you mentioned, it was great to have you, Tom, and Wendy attend that work session to hear the discussions that have gone on about the land use code amendments. As you all have probably known over the last couple of years, we've done about 2 a year of some land use code amendments and updates. This is the first iteration for the 2024 year. There might be another one coming later after oil and gas, or it might kind of get lumped into 2025 for some larger updates to the code. But this is by technicality amendments 14 and 15 to the land use code. We've kind of split them into 2 different buckets, just to, some of them are probably going to have a little bit more lengthy discussion on some, and others are kind of more technical cleanup items. So that's why we've got them separated into 2 different versions. That way we don't have any complications on some versus others. So with that, probably what we will do is Chad has a presentation that he'll kind of go through on generally each code amendment that we're doing. I'll leave it up to you all as a group if you want to kind of go one by one and ask questions, or if you want to go with a couple and then kind of ask questions, or if you want to hear them all and then circle back. It's entirely up to you all and how you want to do it. We have no preference, so we'll leave it to you.
Am I correct? As I recall, he presented each one. There was some there was little or no discussion
Yep.
on. Commissioners, your preference to have him go through each one separately?
I've got a couple of comments on just specific ones, but I've only got 3 comments out of the whole bunch.
Okay, why don't you briefly touch on them?
Yeah, I'll go over
separately?
it the same way that I did.
Yeah,
with
let's
the
do
work
it
session
that,
then.
let's do it that same way, please.
And then just quickly to add to what Kevin had just mentioned, Chairperson Goldstein did mention that that work session was cut short due to running into the actual council meeting. So some of those items, although they were presented in their packet, did not have a full discussion. And that's simply why we have divvied these up into 2 separate amendments. So Amendment 15 is actually items that was also included. Just need a little bit more information on those. And so they may have more discussion, but that's why they're separated. All right, and so I'm going to present these in the order of which they are within the land use code. So I'm going to start with Article 1. We are proposing minor text amendments to sections 110 and 111. This is just around the fees owed by the applicant for development review, aligning with the town's updated fee agreement form. Within section 110, we've simply just added annexations to that. That is just another item that is being reviewed and processed by the town. So there would need to be that reimbursement there for those review and processing of that. So it's a simple, sorry about that. I don't know. Just a simple amendment to that section. And then again, to 111 is just adding that there would be costs for consultants or amounts for staff for review, drafting agreements and processing, just removing what was actual costs to add more teeth to that to conform with that fee agreement. I apologize. This USB drive is plugged in, so I don't know why this is popping up.
Any questions on
Yeah,
that?
so any comments
Yeah,
on Article 1?
Yeah, I'll try and help you along here. Any questions on that one? That's, all right, very good.
Looks good.
Next, thank you.
Okay. Second, in Article 2, we have added a procedure to Section 2935, which would be application submittals. This is simply providing expiration of 180 days for any development application. That would be once comments were issued back to the applicant, there is 180 days to ensure that they are getting back into the development application review process so that they are not going dormant. And not creating a stopgap in development where they're providing a development application in order to meet current standards. We want to ensure that, you know, they're actively participating in the review process, not circumventing that. One last thing, Phil, before you have a
go ahead.
comment, there is the ability to add an extension that we would have a 60-day extension to that. So that would be a conversation with staff and the applicant to give them flexibility if they are running into that 180-day period to add on to that.
There was a bit of discussion on this one. You all recall that? Was there, did you, and stop me if there's any questions on a specific item. There were some good comments and some interesting, Chad, since your recall, I'm sure is younger, definitely younger, if not better than mine. What was a couple things council commented on about this one?
Yeah, so I know council had asked what other areas around here we're doing, if this is something that is in line with that. This is a duration that is in line, I believe. Fort Collins has an 180-day requirement as well. Other jurisdictions do that as well. Staff felt that this would allow for flexibility as larger subdivisions may require longer periods to address all comments from staff. 6 months, we feel, is adequate for that, for some of those larger projects. Also within that, there was questions about how staff would handle this procedure. I think we still need to talk about that a little bit more internally, but I believe it's something we can absolutely do, providing that within our initial comments to applicants, whenever we provide comments, ensuring that it states you have 180 days to return this or ask for extension, some sort of language within those submittals as well.
I think Mike Lewis is about to jump in here, right? But were you? I thought you were coming to my, I thought you also had some technology that allowed you. The question came up, are you always aware that that clock is ticking? And I thought you had that covered, right?
Yeah, I believe we do. So within our online portal, we have the ability to see when that date starts, and we can track that internally.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this one, commissioners? Okay, thank you.
All right. Next in Article 2 is a amendment to criteria 2, 9, 10, 11A2. which is for minor subdivisions for commercial and mixed-use developments. We've added a criteria that those properties have to complete a major subdivision process or fall within a master plan development before applying for a minor subdivision application. Simply, this would prevent large developments from circumventing the code subdivision process by applying for multiple minor subdivision applications, which do not have the same criteria or public involvement. So we want to make sure that that is being met. And we have fully vetted the project from the beginning rather than going through it in small pieces.
So, particularly for our newer commissioners, do you need any clarification? Because I sat there even then I was not entirely certain, the distinction major, minor. Do you need any, would it be helpful if you don't mind, Michael, Mike, the rest of us? Yeah, can you just briefly
Yep.
touch on the,
Yeah, so-
you gave us the why, but explain a little further the
Yep,
distinction.
so the major subdivision process would require sketch plan, preliminary, and a final plat, which does involve public involvement, public hearings. There's also the minor subdivision if you're creating 6 or fewer lots, and they do not have the same requirements, dedication of right-of-way, different things that are required in a major subdivision process. And so ultimately, we're trying to avoid having multiple minor subdivision processes go through, avoiding that major subdivision, avoiding those public hearings, and avoiding that additional criteria that we were looking for.
I don't think council asked this, but I will. Have we seen anybody? Yeah, oh, please.
No, go ahead.
Have we seen that in action and to specifically to try and circumvent?
It has not happened yet. However, there is opportunities that it could happen under this code
Seems
in
like,
current development.
seems like a no-brainer as well. Anybody, any comments on that one? Thank you.
And then in addition to that, we've also reduced the amount of minor subdivisions allowed on a property of 10 acres or more from 10 to 6. So we have reduced that to also eliminate that number.
You said, I thought you said acres. You meant.
Yeah, so properties of 10 acres or more in the code previously stated that they could do a maximum of 10 minor subdivision applications. And now we have reduced that to 6.
Does this, as written, need clarification it appears that I understand it's applications in essence, but does it need clarification to add the acres component in there?
So I do have it in there as properties of 10 acres or more may submit a maximum of 6 minor subdivision applications.
Okay. Is that clear?
And again, that would also have to go through a major subdivision first before they can do that.
Okay. If you're clear, I'm clear. Go ahead. Anybody on that? All right, we're rolling.
I apologize, it is not on the screen here, but I have added another item since the work session. So we've included design standards within Harmony Corridor that may be waived by town council for approval. Within the town council waiver criteria, it allows for the following items to be waived from council: a structure width and depth limits, setback requirements, design location and access to parking, parking ratios, open space requirements, lot coverage limits, screening and landscaping requirements, standards for location and design of uses in mixed-use buildings. And then we are proposing to add applicable Harmony Corridor design standards as identified in section 5.10, which is the Harmony Corridor design standards section. So you'll see in another land use code update that we're proposing that it does not match any of those items. So we are providing the flexibility that identified items in the Harmony Corridor standards could be waived from council.
But
Or
they
by
still
council.
come before council?
Correct. Yes, this is not administrative. This would still be a town council waiver. And this is applicable to building size within the Harmony Corridor.
Do they come before planning commission first or simply go right to council?
They only go to council for
Okay.
review.
Questions on that? All right.
Were they specifically prevented from approving any of that before?
So they were written as a case-by-case basis in the code previously. We've since adjusted the language to allow the square footage to change, which was not within any of those uses or those standards that could be waived. That's why we're trying to add this in there so that council has the ability to actually waive those standards.
At what stage would those come up? Because I'm just thinking, if they came up in a site plan, council wouldn't necessarily see those.
Correct. So previously, how we had done waivers in the past is that it came forward to town council after planning commission had viewed and approved or recommended on a site plan. We are now likely going to flip that and have the waiver go forward for approval first so that the applicant has the understanding of what the parameters are moving forward. So if someone's asking for a waiver on an item,
I see where
Yeah.
you're going with this. That you want to finish it or you want me to finish it?
Go ahead.
Wouldn't that then, if I understood you, might that not be pertinent to our consideration of the site plan? The waiver request?
Well, it sounds like the waiver request would be approved prior to us seeing a site plan. But to me, that kind of hamstrings us and they basically pre-approved the site plan.
Good point.
so it should be just on the item that is waivable. It should not be the entire site plan that would go forward to council.
Oh, sure,
Um,
sure. But I mean, in approving those waivers, we essentially know how they want the vote to go.
Yeah, so typically a lot of that is actually pretty common in other jurisdictions where you have waivers or variances that are approved by a Board of Adjustment council or zoning administrator or something like that before it actually becomes, before a planning commissioner council. So that's not uncommon to actually have a situation like that. And as Chad had mentioned, what we've typically done in the past is that, before a waiver is approved, the whole site does come before you all as planning commission. And there will most likely be instances in the future to where, there's a potential developer and they want to know if they can make a building work or something and they need a waiver from some of the Harmony Corridor standards to be able to make their project work to where they would go to council to ask for that. And then, just because a certain item is waived from criteria doesn't mean it's a predetermined vote. That's only one item out of criteria that needs to be met. From that standpoint, it's almost the same way as that your approval of the site plan could then go to council and council looks at that and says, well, our vote's predetermined because planning commission has also voted, for this. So it's just more of, this is actually just more or less bringing in that the Harmony Corridor standards are eligible to be waived by council, as the other items that Chad had mentioned, just because there are, a lot of different oddities within the Harmony Corridor that doesn't really fall within the, predetermined 8 items within the land use code. That could be waived from that standpoint. So this is doing is just kind of allowing some of those standards to be waived. And if it comes first before council to then for somebody to go do a site plan, it can work that way, or it can work just as how we've done it on other ones, to where it comes before you all and then council has to be the final vote on if they like the waiver or not. Some might say that them going to council first is actually easier, because if council doesn't want to approve a waiver after you all have approved it, then they would have to go back to the drawing board and redo their entire site to make sure a criteria has been met.
Would we would be aware, obviously, well, having attended the meetings, we would be aware though, the entire commission, absent of attending the council meeting prior to ours, theoretically, the week before, or whatever, 2 weeks before, we would be aware going into the consideration of the site plan that council reviewed and approved a
Yep.
waiver.
Yep.
And then
And-
what
and
would happen
most-
if we then said we would not have, would it have been within our purview then to say we would not approve the site plan given that waiver, which is,
But procedurally, I would think you're
Yeah.
prevented from doing that because this rule. and
I
they've
know.
Already approved it.
yeah,
Yeah, hypothetically, what happens? We don't like it.
That would be more of a Carolyn question, but I believe if council has approved a waiver, then that criteria has been met essentially from the code. But yeah, and Phil, to your point, that waiver would probably be determined months before any site would come before you all if a waiver was wanted to be asked for before it came to you guys as on a site plan, just because somebody would want to make sure that that criteria could be met before they go into site designing. From that standpoint, we do have it the other way to where some do the site designing, hoping on it, that council does approve it after you all, from that standpoint. So either way, if a waiver is asked for beforehand, you all would know about it.
how about giving us an example? What is one of the largest or most substantive waivers that could be requested on a project? This is not absolute to help with our discussion, but give me an example of.
I mean,
something.
I think that'd be hard to tell because that's in the eye of the beholder, what would be substantive or not. But, for instance, one of the things that I think Chad's going to mention later is the building size up against Harmony Road. If, we got a bigger box user or something that came in and they were 2,000, 3,000 square feet over our minimum, size or maximum size up against Harmony Road, that could be something that they could go before, council to say, we want that criteria waived because we have this building and this use that's 3, 4, 5,000 square feet bigger than what you guys allow for up on Harmony Road. And that's where, like in that instance, they would most likely want to know that before they go into site designing and get all the way through the process to potentially have that denied.
This was the example that was used on this item that night, wasn't it? A larger building.
Yep.
This is where that stemmed from. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, now I recall that discussion. Carolyn, any thoughts on procedurally or otherwise? Marty's point is well taken.
Yeah, I mean, once council has approved a variance, that the variance would not be a valid reason for recommending disapproval of a site plan application. So you're going to apply the site plan application criteria in making a recommendation, but that alone would not be a valid reason to recommend disapproval.
Other thoughts, commissioners?
I guess I would just say it, I get that you would want to know that early in the process. It just, it kind of a touchy thing though, what we're doing.
I mean, we already have it in the code that says waivers are allowed in the Harmony corridor, and we're just bringing this actually to be more clear that these are waivers to be done. It's not, I mean, even with how it is now, any of those other 8 items that are under our waiver could come before council, before you all. So it's the same scenario that we've had for years. We're just basically now bringing it to be more clear to say Harmony corridor standards are an item that's eligible to be waived by council instead of one sentence in a different section within the Harmony corridor standards to say this could be waived on a case by case basis.
And this is only the Harmony corridor, correct?
For this specific,
this
yes,
specific-
but all the other 8 are eligible anywhere in town.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not terribly troubled by the fact that having an understanding of how council feels about something formally or informally. I'm not terribly troubled by that because council, we make recommendations, site plan notwithstanding. But your point is well taken, and if you have some suggestion, we can consider it. But I don't have maybe a better way to put this. How often might this come up? I didn't get a sense and I realize you were just using the example, the square footage issue. I didn't get a sense that that was something that from the discussion of council, that in and of itself was something that they probably wouldn't make any substantive variances.
You wouldn't think so.
For that one. So just, how often is this likely to come? First of all, the Harmony Corridor is not infinite in and of itself.
Yep. Yeah, so there, as of now, there is only one item or criteria that would be applicable to this standard within Harmony Corridor that does not fall within the other 8 waivable criteria. So this is just as of now identified within one criteria for building size. Currently, the code has it to where, we'll get into it a little later, it uses case by case. And so council was a little concerned with case by case. This gives a little more or gives them more control to have a waiver, an insight on the size of these buildings. So right now it is just to that one item. Any item that would be identified as waivable would have to be moved forward as a noted as such to meet this criteria.
And thanks. And Carolyn, this is, now I knew that when you asked about offered to be here, I do remember, because I may have been the one that asked it. And if you could, for everybody's benefit, mention case by case situations that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why case by case doesn't mean every case, doesn't set a precedent. But you can explain it better than I can.
Right. So I think the question that was asked at the work session was something to the effect that if there's a variance or an approval given in a specific circumstance, does that create a precedent that you have to give that variance or approval in another circumstance? And while it does not create a precedent, no, you have to apply the criteria to each individual application. And so each time you're going to be, for 2 applications for the same type of approval, whether it's a variance or a site plan, the criteria are going to stay the same unless they've been amended by the land use code. And so you want to consistently apply those criteria, but each time it's going to have different location, different traffic pattern, different use, different factors that may be applicable to the second application. So just because you've approved one doesn't mean you would approve a second, as there's going to be a different fact pattern for each one.
Thank you. So to move this along, I agree. It's a bit hinky, if you will, to use a non-scientific term here, but
I've
all
got a
right.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
As a new member, how many times have there been waivers on the Harmony Corridor in the recent past?
That's a good question.
It's been 4, and they're all minor modifications, like a landscaping setback or something like that of a building separation. They've all been minor waivers to that criteria, and that's where some of the oddity is that those came before Planning Commission first, and then went to council after the fact, from that standpoint, which kind of does put that a little bit more limbo. But yeah, like I said, this is just basically cleaning up language that's already existing in the code of, instead of case by case basis, to say this is an eligible waiver item for council, from that standpoint.
Thank you.
All right. Is that sufficient? It's not perfect. Okay. Well, the proof will be as we see these things come up. Perhaps in retrospect, we'll say we should have fought a little harder, but or not, or it was much ado about nothing, I suppose. Okay, very good. Let's move it along. Thanks.
All right. The next amendment is a correction, correcting an error in section 2.11.2 of the code. Currently, we have the requirement to provide a certificate of zoning for new uses of land, ensuring that they comply with the zoning that they're on. Currently, we have that listed as a permit. It is actually a compliance letter, so we just wanted to amend that language to correct that so that it is actually what it is, which is a compliance letter rather than a permit process.
Go ahead.
My apologies.
There it
So
is.
next is Article 3. So this one is just a change to Table 3.1, which is the standard zoning districts. This has all the town zoning districts and their use category. With that, they also have the future land use designations from the comprehensive plan associated with those. Those were outdated from the previous comprehensive plan. So we are just now updating this to what is matching the 2020 approved comprehensive plan land use designations. They're not changing, they're just matching what is actually in the document now.
Very good with that.
I've got a concern here, Chad. In the table where, for example, under R2 single family residential, you're going from LDR to adding MDR. Isn't that what you're doing in some of these? It appears, and maybe I'm wrong, that in some cases you're adding the ability to create additional density in some of these established residential zoning districts.
So it's a little confusing because this is actually going backwards. So the comprehensive plan actually has larger or more broad designations for what the zoning could be. So technically in our comprehensive plan, if there is a property that is designated as MDR, it could meet multiple different, it could be approved as multiple different zoning districts such as R2, RMU, things like that. So it's not, it would have to have a comprehensive plan change before any densities could be added to it. This is just matching what is in that comprehensive plan for those designations.
The concern I have, just the way I read this, if some zoning district, let's say it's single family homes, and the house burns down, they want to build it back. The way this reads, you could do an MDR, which means you could build a duplex instead of a single family home.
You would have to do a comprehensive plan amendment or zoning change to do that. So you'd have to rezone the property to get that higher density outside of what is permitted.
It also adds, high density residential to an R3, which I don't believe has ever been allowed before. It just from the appearance, it looks like you're adding density, and I don't think that was your intent.
So Tom, this, as Chad had mentioned, you got to work backwards on this. So the comprehensive plan designations all tee up what zonings are allowed within that comprehensive plan designation. And our comp plan back from 2020 allowed for multiple zoning districts to be allowed within certain districts. So from that standpoint, the R3 could, be the medium density, high density residential or mixed use designation from that standpoint. So what this is just saying is that this is in line with what our approved comp plan is of saying that designation would allow for these zoning types within it. So just because, somebody's house burns down and they want to go up and put a multifamily just because it says HDR doesn't mean that that's allowed. It's just saying that zoning falls under that category within our comprehensive plan from that standpoint. If somebody wanted to do, higher density residential, they'd have to go through a rezoning. And if if their comprehensive plan designation doesn't meet that zoning that they want to do, they would have to go through a comp plan amendment to then get to that other designation, potentially to then rezone, to then be able to do it. So all this is doing is just bringing what zoning districts are in line with what our comprehensive plan designations call out for what zonings are allowed in that designation.
Okay, it just a little bit confusing, and in particular where we have, it appears that we're kind of going away from the neighborhood commercial and the community commercial and making them all just commercial. I know in the original planning efforts, when they created the neighborhood residential or commercial and the community residential, it was in the thought that you'd have, you know, a coffee shop on the corner and walkable neighborhoods. And now if you say, okay, that can be high-rise apartment buildings, that's really not in keeping with some of the original planning thoughts and not in keeping with the neighborhood at all. And I think that there are a few examples out there where developers have come up and said, yeah, we're going to put townhouses here. And it really wasn't in keeping with the neighborhood.
So what you're talking about would need to be brought up at the comprehensive plan level, not the zoning, the land use code level. Because all of this is doing, as I mentioned, is just bringing the old designations from our previous 2013 comp plan to be what's current with our 2020 comp plan on designations. There used to be 16 designations back in 2013. We condensed it down to the 8 that we have now. So things like where it says LDMU, low density mixed use, that doesn't exist anymore on any of our documents. So all we're doing with that is bringing these to be in current with current terms and designations that we have in our comprehensive plan. So what you're talking about of what would need to be modified would need to be at the comprehensive plan level, not a land use code level.
To-
Are you?
I have a
comfortable with
clarification on that as well.
I'm still a little bit concerned about it.
Yeah.
Let me clarify. So if someone's coming in for a land use approval, it is going to be the zoning district restrictions that are going to apply. It's not going to be the comprehensive plan designations. So this isn't changing the permitted uses of any particular property because the zoning of those properties are not changing. But in the comprehensive plan, if we look at the R3, properties might be listed in the comprehensive plan as medium density or high density or mixed use on the comp plan. That at some point they said for planning purposes, we wanted to be one of those 3. But when they got to actual zoning, they made the designation that for this particular parcel or piece of parcel properties, we're going to make them mixed residential. Okay. So that R3 mixed residential will continue to control what they can actually build on that property. And if they want,
I think I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I think the concern I have is for existing owners in a neighborhood with single family houses, if the comprehensive plan or the zoning would allow some significant change to that neighborhood, I think the neighbors would feel ripped off. That somebody made a change that they were not able to influence.
And that's where the zoning still dictates, just because a comprehensive plan designation allows for multiple zonings, doesn't mean that that's an automatic for a property owner to just go and do something that's outside of their zoning. The comprehensive plan is the guiding document, but the zoning is still what dictates what they can actually build into what densities. So that's where if they would have to go through a rezoning process to get to any scenario that you were referring to. Just because our land use code says that zoning falls underneath that designation doesn't automatically give somebody that right. And that's where I was saying you'd have to.
I understand what you're saying. I think we need to avoid some of the things that have happened in Fort Collins, for example, where they're starting to put ADUs in the backyards of single family housing. And they're saying, well, that extra density is allowed under the zoning requirements because over the years they've changed the zoning requirements. And all of a sudden people were trapped in a situation where they really couldn't fight something that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have moved into that neighborhood to start with.
I mean, our code already allows for ADUs in residential zoning districts. Just because a designation says it could be medium density residential doesn't mean that it's granted additional density from that standpoint. The zoning still dictates from that standpoint of what types of structures you can build on the property at what densities, things like that. And that's why I had mentioned that concern is more of a comprehensive plan update concern, not a land use code update.
So you're giving your real world example. You're essentially saying, if I could, what Tom worries could happen on behalf of other residents would not happen.
They'd have to go through a rezoning.
Okay, which would give,
Fair enough.
and would come to council. It would give
Right.
everybody an opportunity.
So if somebody
Plus,
up in the golf course community wanted to put a shipping crate container ADU in the backyard, you'd be able to say, no, that's not allowed. It's not in keeping with the neighborhood.
right, and there would be public hearings on that as well.
Right.
So I appreciate you coming up with a good example.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things that I think Fort Collins is struggling with right now.
So just to be clear, as I mentioned, accessory dwelling units are permitted within our code, within residential zoning districts. So just because somebody wants to do an ADU in their house doesn't mean it'd have to come before as a rezoning. It's already a use by right within zoning districts. So if somebody in your neighborhood wants to go do an ADU, they have that use by right already within our code. So just because a designation says an R2 zoning falls underneath a medium density designation in our comp plan doesn't mean that there's automatically an additional 4 units density that they could do on a property. They still have to fall within the zoning code and everything that falls under that.
Do a new comprehensive plan. So
Specifically address.
if I want to make a duplex out of my single family house, I'd still have to go through the same process. And
Or your shipping
presumably that would
container.
make it difficult.
Or your shipping container.
Or shipping container, yeah.
Are we? Okay.
Fair enough.
All right.
I think we
We only
could.
have a couple hours to go here.
Yep,
So we're
I'm
gonna have
sorry.
a little levity. All right. Okay, let's roll on here.
Staff is proposing clarification within the overview of districts in section 432. We would like to eliminate misinterpretation or confusion around what an overlay district is and their permissions. So we are adding except as expressly modified by the overlay district in this to cover that. So if there's an overlay district, there are uses that could be permitted by right within that document. And so we are removing the last section, which also includes a no case shall any use be permitted in a plan development district that is not allowed in any residential or mixed use district as designated in Article 3. That actually is contradicting what is in Section 322. So I'm just going to read that aloud for everyone, just so they know why that change is being made. 322 is overlay districts. Overlay districts are established to provide for certain additional requirements to permit uses not otherwise permitted in the underlying base district, to prohibit uses allowed in the underlying base district where they may be inappropriate, or to establish special development requirements for uses permitted in the base district. So that's where that language is a bit confusing. So we're trying to remove any of that confusion and aligning with what we have as what an overlay district is defined and permitted to do.
Am I correct? We saw this, the concerns that this is trying to address come up with Ladera. Am I correct? And then I believe one of the other of you used the customization verbiage.
Yes, I do believe that within that development, it was questioned whether a use could be permitted in that district or not. But the overlay does allow for, as we stated, permitted uses not otherwise permitted in that underlying base district. So it does allow for that in that overlay district.
Commissioners, questions on this? Clear? All right. Thank you.
Next, we are just adding the use of a mixed-use building within our permit, our table of permitted uses. We have a definition for this use, but we did not have it in that table. We are just proposing to have it mimic what is the mixed-use dwelling. So it would be permitted in all mixed-use and commercial zoning districts in town. Council did raise the question on looking into these permissions on whether we initially had it in industrial as well, whether all of these zoning districts were appropriate for this use. Based on this definition, there is a partial use for residential. So we felt that having it in that industrial use actually did not make sense. So we have removed that, but permitted it in mixed use in commercial districts. Because there has to be a residential component to this building.
Is that clear, Jerry, to you all? Okay.
Yeah, so it's mixed use districts. They are intended to have that mix of use, whether it be residential or mix of office and commercial. Since there is residential component to that, we felt that that was applicable. Same with those commercial districts as well.
Does that apply to a live work?
It could, yes,
Type of
it could.
development?
Yep.
Fairview Village started out that way and then morphed into pure residential. Do you recall? Maybe you weren't even. Okay, yeah, probably I'm the only one.
Yeah, this could be constructed in a number of ways, but typically, you know, office or retail on the bottom floor, and then residential on top.
All right, everybody clear on that? Good. All right, thank you, Chad.
Next, also within that table, we just found some inconsistencies with some uses that are in our industrial zoning district that had a varying degree of permissions. We felt that these three uses were similar, therefore should have the same permissions, which would be a conditional use to allow the town the ability to make sure that any adverse impacts are mitigated during that site plan review process.
We went through this quite some time ago, I guess. This seems to be making it more restrictive, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. So there would never, to understand this, never be more than one at an intersection.
Yeah, I apologize. I had flipped my screen there. I was talking
Sorry.
about the one before that. So there's in table 4.1, we had three uses that had different allowances for the industrial zoning district. So the use of equipment, truck and trailer rental establishments with outdoor storage was permitted by right. Motor vehicle, recreational vehicle, and boat and truck storage was permitted with conditions. And then outside storage was conditional. So we felt that these uses were similar enough with their outdoor storage component that we would like to see that as a conditional use so that any adverse impacts on those adjacent properties, should there be any, could be addressed at site plan.
That require any rezoning for some of the developments already proposed?
No, it would not impact the zoning itself. It's just the permitted uses of those three land uses.
Mhm.
And it's actually changing too. So outside storage is what we based it off of. It is not changing.
Okay, then the next one is,
Yep.
you jumped over this one.
Yep.
That's why you brought it. Okay, you weren't addressing.
Yep.
Oh, my
And
God.
then, so as you mentioned, council asked that we look into the distance requirements for retail fuel stations. We initially had that at a quarter mile within the Harmony corridor, so no more than one within a quarter mile. We have since changed that to a half mile. And we have removed the designation of that intersection type. And so it is, and the rest of any other zoning district within town, there shall be no more than one retail fuel station at any intersection. And so there is not any concerns of what type of intersection that may be. It's just any intersection.
Entire Harmony corridor is only,
And then the Harmony corridor is just based on that distance.
but it's only about how long?
Yep.
Yeah, there's your, thanks. That helped. I remember that.
So we're proposing the yellow buffer there, the distance there. We think that that is adequate to eliminate a number of retail fuel within that half mile.
Any questions on that?
Nope.
Very good. Thanks.
Next is for the addition to our block diversity requirements. Within our application that goes out to developers, there is added criteria for garages. That was not included in our code. We are just simply adding that. We are still enforcing that in review of block diversity, but we're just putting it in the code just so that we have it there. There were some discussions about the sizing of doors, garage doors. We have limited that to 16 feet would be considered a standard garage door.
Perfect sense to me. Okay.
All right, next is a amendment to table 5.4, which is plant standards, installation and maintenance. Due to a limited supply of large deciduous trees, we are unable or having trouble finding those that meet that 3 to 3.5 inch caliper, which is being required currently. So we're requesting to reduce that requirement to be 2 inches. So it would be large deciduous and shade trees where its mature canopy diameter is greater than 30 feet wide shall be a minimum of 2 inches in caliber. And so as staff is reviewing these plans, they will provide those canopy diameters as well as the caliper for us to review to ensure that this is being met.
So, because as I've mentioned to council, I also wear a hat of as HOA president, and so presumably does Commissioner Lowry down there. Could you explain this? The HOA standards can trump this and certain other things as we go along here, correct?
They can be more restrictive.
More
Yeah,
restrictive.
exactly.
And
This
Not
ruling's not going to change the ability for xeric landscaping if somebody wants to eliminate the grass or something and put in a bunch of rocks.
Nope, they should still be able to amend their landscaping or the right-of-way landscaping to the criteria that we have in the code, which is 75% live ground cover. But those trees would need to remain based on what is proposed in the platting of that lot. And in addition to that, the ornamental trees, again, we have it by its canopy diameter of less than 30 feet, would then be able to be a minimum of 1.5 inches at planting. So again, staff could review those smaller trees. We've lumped kind of medium and small together based on that canopy diameter.
And regarding the size of trees, I seem to recall council bring up if the market changes, this could be changed back, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Yes. Questions? Anything else? Okay. Next.
All right, so we are going to recommend some changes to our buffer yard table in Amendment 15. But in addition to that, we are looking at some added parameters to our screening within surface parking and driveways. So this is section 5773. So we are adding the following language. So currently we have parking areas and drive aisles shall be screened from any street with plantings. So we are adding such as shrubs and evergreens, fences, masonry walls, berms, or a combination of walls, berms, and densely planted beds. Within that, we are also proposing plantings shall be installed to screen a minimum of 75% of that buffer area. So whatever that square footage of that planting bed is, 75% would have to be screened at maturity. Since now currently the code only has it as it must have plantings. So we're adding additional requirements there to ensure that that screening is actually being imposed.
Good.
In addition, we are adding the language parking buffer yard shall be a minimum of 5 feet in width, not including any vehicular overhang areas. Parking buffer yards must be installed between the parking lot and sidewalk of adjacent street. Parking screening shall provide a minimum visual obstruction of 3 feet above the parking surface. So that is plantings at maturity. They must grow at least 3 feet in height to screen any headlights within this parking area.
All right.
Next is section 581, which is relating to tree lawns. Ultimately, we are adding some clarifying language here. The code currently requests that for every 40 linear feet, there be one deciduous or shade tree in that tree lawn. We are actually adding language that at least one street tree adjacent to each lot in residential developments, whichever is greater. So this is not, sometimes during development, there are different sizing of lots, so these requirements may not necessarily be met. Some of these, one per every 40 could be an aggregate of a street lot, and it may not capture every single lot's frontage. So we're adding this language to where at least every lot has this, or whichever is greater. So lots that have larger frontage would then have to meet that 1 per 40 to ensure that they're providing that for that spacing requirement. Or if there's a smaller lot, to ensure that they get one, they are providing one on each lot. So it just ensures that there's that street tree on every lot.
And Chad, I guess there'd be an exemption for some of the cul-de-sacs where the frontage is so small that you can't even put one tree per lot. In some cases, there's just not enough tree lawn to do that.
Yeah, we'd have to evaluate that during the platting process. We're adding more language into those plats to ensure that if there was a conflict, that the tree is still provided. We'll have to see if there are any areas where it is an issue like that. We just have to monitor that.
There's a lot of existing cul-de-sacs where the driveways are such that you can't get that extra tree in.
Yeah, and so we're hoping to have this language in early on to avoid that, but we will evaluate that.
Thank you.
Next, we have within Table 5.6, our parking requirements. We are actually looking to remove the requirement for parking spaces within restaurants with and without drive-throughs for outdoor seating. We've looked at other codes surrounding municipalities. We may actually be the only one. Kevin has a little more knowledge on that, but this is just a little, doesn't seem to necessarily be a requirement. It's not necessarily always a outdoor seating area that would be required for this parking. We feel this area could be used for other uses such as open space or other design elements.
We good? All right, keep rolling.
Next, we'll dive into the Harmony Corridor standards. So in the intro of the Harmony Corridor description, it currently only had it applicable to lots that were in community, commercial, or mixed-use districts. We felt that moving forward, we should include all zoning districts that may apply or be developed within the Harmony Corridor. This would be standards include those zoned as commercial, mixed use, industrial, or residential of 8 dwelling units per acre or more. We base that off of the attached product, which is often found within the R3 zoning district. So if there was a residential product that was to be proposed along Harmony Road, if it were of that density, we would have the ability to enforce those standards in the Harmony Corridor.
Seemed to make sense to me, the council meeting.
Next was the amendment to 510.5.2, which is building placement. So currently the code reads as buildings shall not exceed 25,000 square feet of single story footprint along or adjacent to Harmony Road. We have discussed internally in our discussion with our work session, believe that that number should actually be reduced to 20,000 square feet of single story footprint. So it now reads as buildings exceeding that 20,000 square feet may be authorized on a case-by-case basis. See section 2915 for waiver process for approval. So that's where that kind of comes back to that case-by-case, meaning that it is at town council's discretion to review that waiver. There was a section that mentioned the location of hotel, big box retailer, grocery stores fronting Harmony Road may also be accepted on a case-by-case basis. Staff felt that those uses would also be included within a size building up 20,000 square feet or larger. So that could be reviewed by town council for their approval.
What Am I correct? You all recall it? What was that number when you brought it to the work session?
So the code currently reads is not exceeding 25,000 square feet. Some of the council members had mentioned that they felt that that was too large already. So we have since reduced that to 20,000 square feet for them to review for waiver approval, anything larger than that.
Which I thought was prudent at the time. You agreed? Everybody good with that? And again, case by case, based on, as Carolyn said, based on prevailing parameters, prevailing circumstances. Very good. Okay. Thank you.
Also, within this section, we have added clarification that buildings that are addressing or fronting Harmony Road be primary buildings, not accessory to that primary use. So it must be a primary building fronting that road. Just to add clarification so there's not a misinterpretation of that requirement.
Which brings up a point, as I recall, when we approved the site plan for the car wash, which then went to council, it was because there were multiple buildings. Are there still destined to be buildings, and is this, does this apply to that circumstance? Not, perhaps not retroactively, but is this
So,
addressing that kind of
so
circumstance?
that site plan would actually still be meeting this requirement because those are two standalone commercial buildings. So those are those primary uses of those buildings. And yes, they were approved to have those buildings fronting Harmony Road. So that is part of that approved site plan that would need to be brought forward.
And it would have, even under this state, it would have been approved.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Are they ever going to build those two extra buildings?
They should. My understanding that there was an agreement with the property owner that they had a certain time frame to which they needed to do that. So yes, hoping they're within that time frame. Absolutely.
I saw that the lot was up for sale, so maybe he's still looking for somebody.
Yeah, so I believe he owns the lot. It's just the buildings that he's looking to lease out and find tenants for.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
Next, we are into,
Did you skip over something? Am I wrong? Planting beds.
oh, yes, I
Oh.
apologize. You are correct. So within the Harmony corridor, there's also, it is also lacking some standards as far as the planting requirements within parking lots. So in the perimeter parking lot section, we are adding section 4 that 100% of planting beds be live ground covering except for vehicular overhangs. So that is also being proposed within this amendment.
That would not prohibit xeric landscaping, rocks and so forth, would it?
It would not, as long as the plantings at maturity would be able to grow out to be that 100% coverage. So there could be shrubs throughout that grow to create that coverage.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for catching that, Phil. So Article 6, we are now into the street layouts. We are amending section 662B 1. So currently, it reads as all streets shall be sized per the Town of Timnath Transportation Master Plan. However, the Transportation Master Plan does not contemplate for private drives. I think the minimum criteria we have is for local roads. So in order to clarify with that, we have all public streets shall be sized per the Town of Timnath Transportation Master Plan. If a development is proposing private drives, they shall be designed to the local street standard criteria at a minimum per the Lucas criteria, which is what the town uses for their review. Also, the design of alleys would also need to meet the criteria for such road design in Lucas.
And that
And this is-
includes standard pavement profiles as well as widths, right? The depth of asphalt.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it would meet the cross sections for those roadways. And staff just wanted to ensure that down the line, if these roads needed to be maintained or turned over, they would at least meet the town's criteria so that we could have that in line.
Great.
Next in Article 6 is Section 6.8, Contribution for Public School Sites. So we have an existing intergovernmental agreement with PSD, Purdue School District, that is inconsistent with what the code is showing for these requirements. So we are amending the language as such that these be reviewed in accordance with the most recently signed intergovernment agreement between the town and appropriate school district. So this could be for any other school district, not just PSD, that may come down the line. And so it is also mentioned as established in the mentioned IGA. So any of those requirements for calculations would then be brought back to that IGA. And I have attached that into the packet for your review. All right, now we are on to signs. We have added some prohibited signs, one being inflatable signs or balloons, signs that are designed to appear as inflatable signs, with the exception of personal use to advertise temporary events on private property, birthdays, graduations, notwithstanding the contrary. Prohibited inflatable signs or balloons may be allowed with temporary sign permit approved by the director. So currently in our code, we do have temporary sign approvals. They, I believe, have a duration of up to 10 days. So we would have the ability to review. If someone wanted to bring forward any of these items on their private property, we could review that in a quick review to allow such use.
Does that
This
mean
is-
you're going to require a permit for holiday inflatables like at Halloween and Christmas?
We would not.
Just in defense of my grandkids, they want to see that.
You're asking that because council asked something similar.
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
good.
so ultimately, this is geared towards advertisement within development. So as everyone in this room is aware, a lot of these new developments are using balloons as ways of attracting visitors to those areas, which has become problematic with winds and different elements. We're just trying to avoid that for safety reasons. So that's why this is being implemented.
Okay.
Anybody else on that one? Anybody else? Okay.
Similar to that,
Very good.
we are proposing to prohibit any sign containing or consisting of ribbons, streamers, spinners, pennants, or similar moving, fluttering, or revolving devices. You may recall in the work session, we had that as including string lights. Staff felt that we could remove that from this requirement as there are other users in town already, restaurants, things of that are using these and didn't necessarily need to fall under the prohibited signs. We do have requirements for illumination of these signs already in our code, so we felt comfortable removing that.
So never let it be said, we don't get down in the weeds here.
Some of this is starting to read like an HOA document.
We.
I'll take that as a compliment. Michael?
I'm on an HOA and I don't like myself.
All right.
Chad, I noticed that it's prohibited sings. Section 7.6.
Oh. In the title.
Sings. Yeah, they didn't catch that at the council
Thank
meeting
you.
either. But we did.
No more singing.
No more sign,
Oh,
the
on my
heading.
PowerPoint, I was like,
Signs.
I wasn't
Yeah.
seeing that. Okay, thank you for catching that. Appreciate
All right.
that.
Unless it's
We-
approved by the director.
We caught
Yes.
it, but council didn't.
So what about the window signs? So like restaurants and building or, businesses have signs in their windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, so staff, we talked about this internally. We felt that adding more than what is permitted in those two sections that are called out could provide to be a clutter to those buildings and that the wall signs would be adequate enough for those users.
So what is 757 and 4.4.1.7.d.5 say?
So Marty, those are typically for, like if you have your address, business name on, front door,
Mhm.
of the business. That's what those are, those permit those. What we're getting at with window signs is if you've got especially like on the Harmony corridor to where we are requiring double transparency. If you've got, a window that's, 15 feet tall and, 15 feet long, you could essentially do that whole window as a signage for your business from that standpoint, because our code doesn't prohibit that right now. So that's what this is getting after, is essentially just prohibiting folks to using their whole, 20, 30, 40 feet of window frontage of their building to advertise their business instead of doing a window or wall sign. But still, like the smaller signs for stating your business address on your front door, things like that, those are still permitted. It's just kind of getting after the larger signs that you could, vinyl signs that you could do on a window.
But at the same time, it like, if you drive by like Wendy's or, some of the other places, they have, their meal deals or whatever, they can't do that.
By this, let me reread the other ones, but essentially
It would probably affect our chicken and donuts sign that he paints on the inside wall that you can see through the window.
I knew we were going to get hung up on this one. I just knew it.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Oh, that's just for a whole box.
It would seem to, all joking aside, it would seem to require some consideration for those at pure commercial enterprises, but there is a proliferation of those.
I mean, if you guys are comfortable with wanting to allow Wendy's and some of those other ones to affix a bunch of those signs up to their windows, you guys can make a recommendation with a condition to add that. It's just those from staff standpoint, having that ability with a lot of those businesses provides the clutter and kind of actually gets them around the signage criteria.
I think without either some consideration clause, there's either benign neglect or there's excessive regulation.
Yeah, I don't want to be rude, but I mean, it's true. This is sounding more like an HOA, not a land use code. And to not allow them to put up signs advertising, the whatever deals they have going on, or some do the painting and things like that, just seems
Yeah.
like overreach to me.
And I think some of the buildings along here, for example, the window that fronts Harmony on Chicken and Donuts, you see a blank wall. And he wrote Chicken and Donuts on the blank wall. Is that prohibited? Gosh, it looks better than a blank wall.
If it's the interior wall, no, from what you said
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, if that's an interior wall, that's their own right within the interior. It's just, this is, like I said, this is getting after, the ability for folks to circumvent the wall signage criteria by taking a 15-foot by 15-foot window and putting a vinyl up that says this is their business.
But that doesn't happen very often, does it?
Oddly enough, it does when you have we've actually had some requests for a lot of those.
So am I hearing some sentiment for some easily identifiable, easily categorical clause? And Carolyn, I'm going to put you on the spot. Could you think of some clarifying statement, essentially except as provided for a commercial establishment where?
Or just saying window signs above 4x4 or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
might
it could
be
be a
easier.
size, or it could be a percentage of the window covering more than X percentage of the window, or there could be an exception for temporary, signs for, temporary
Yeah.
special deals or
Gets into
something.
an architectural control committee. You're not careful.
Oh, please.
We're now officially the DRC.
Yeah, well, all right. Okay, let's earn our keep here. Let's see if we can quickly hammer out some verbiage. What, or would it be out of the question to have you bring forward, when this gets to council, note that we parsed the details and further than they did, including catching the misspelling of signs. And,
Right.
and we also felt that there was, should be some consideration for commercial enterprises in some fashion. And you perhaps craft something, we'll trust you to bring that forward
I think
when it
we-
gets to council, or do you want to take a
I-
crack at it?
Well, I mean, I think it's relatively simple. You know, if we don't strike it out completely, we just say window signs above, and let's draw a line in the sand and us suggest a size, a maximum size.
At this point,
That would
when
be
we have
simple.
3 more hours of
But
code to
I
go
think
over,
it's fairly simple. It's
I'm o-
above, how about
Yeah, I think what
4
you
foot?
suggested, 4 feet,
4 by
sounds
4
good to me.
feet,
Yeah.
4 by 4,
4 by 4,
4 by 3?
or 16 square feet.
Yeah,
if-
whatever,
in case it's a-
whatever
in case
words
it's a 2
make
by
sense.
8.
I'm sure staff can come up with something.
I mean, we at least put something there to them. for them to add.
I agree. If we can get her done, let's put something forward. Does that seem
Yeah.
reasonable?
Got it. So the recommendation on 7.6.23 would be to prohibit window signs, except as those 2 exceptions, or prohibit window signs over 4 feet by 4 feet.
Works for me.
And would that be per every individual window element or in total for any use?
Staff would
window
have
element.
discretion.
Thank you.
Anybody?
There's
per
an
window element?
executive decision.
Yeah. I'm okay with that.
You're good?
Yep.
All right. So
And
something,
not to bring another one into discussion, but the whole ribbons and streamers and pennants. So what the car wash has around it right now with the pennants, you know, celebrating its opening would be no longer allowed either.
Correct,
And no balloons in front of new houses being developed.
correct. Yep. Staff has seen that, as I mentioned, with winds and other elements, there are times where these are either deflated or being blown away or just becoming problematic within the overall town development. So staff felt best to just completely prohibit those to avoid that.
all right. So you or somebody's keeping track. This is so far the only amendment the amendment when we make our motion, Deanne, will,
Correct.
as amended in item 7.6.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody's gonna put up a flagpole and put a flag on it. Is that gonna be allowed? Is that
By
kind of-
state law, it would be.
Yeah, that's an exempt sign in our code, so.
I don't know. That second bullet, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like when the car wash opens, I don't see really an issue with a temporary banner, or as you said there, to advertise its opening. I understand you don't want it to be permanent, but you know, something for like a couple of weeks or a month, I think is a fair exception.
I'm glad you brought that up because I should be remiss in not mentioning it. I don't know how else people would find out about it that it's now open. And it wouldn't be, you wouldn't expect them to put up something of a permanent nature.
Right.
And
but-
you, and I don't think you'd want one of those electronic signs. No, and I think his point is well taken that should be some consideration for a new business opening.
We do allow for other sign types, feather. There can also be banner signs within the property. There's other signs that are allowed within our code that could also be used as grand opening signs. I feel like if we were to add this as temporary to these signs, it'd be hard for staff to monitor that or to control that. I know code enforcement's already struggling with different signs already, so putting timeframes on those could be problematic. We could look into that if that is what planning commission prefers.
But to Mike's point, they have to assume, they have to, they can't open until you have to get approval to open, correct?
They have to receive a CO, correct?
So, and where I'm headed with this is, would it be sufficient to cover this at that point to say, okay, you got a CO now. But if you're thinking of putting one of those wavy things out there with the big arms and stuff, you can't do that, but here's what you can do. So we would at least make it known that we're not prohibiting them from letting the public know that we're finally open for business.
Yep.
The car wash is a great example. I wouldn't have known it was open without seeing something, and I don't know what else you would use.
They can hire a guy to throw a sign around in the air.
What about that? What, is that allowed?
I don't know.
We do not have anything in our code for that, no.
Spinner,
It's a
that's a
spinner.
spinner.
It's a revolving device.
Okay, well, we only, but that's a good point. Like, so are we comfortable that we've got some provision to allow new businesses?
From staff, I believe so, yes.
It's here, are we good?
Yeah.
All right, Mike, you good? Good point. All right,
All right, moving on to Article 10. The town's code is inconsistent with the requirements of the Colorado Annexation Act for signatures required for landowner petitions. Currently, our code had it as a petition shall be signed by 100% of private property owners. We are just now matching what is in that Annexation Act referenced in the summary, that more than 50% of the landowners who own more than 50% of the private property. And we've added property other than public street, alley, public right-of-way, or town-owned property described in the petition. So that's just matching what is already in the Annexation Act.
This applies to prescriptive annexations as well, or is that different?
There's no prescriptive annexation. There's an enclave if you are if the town entirely encompasses a piece of property, it's called an enclave. And this would not apply to that because in that case, the property can be annexed without a petition at all. So this would only be when a landowner voluntarily petitions. So at least 50% of the owners would be voluntarily petitioning. Now, they still can't add conditions of annexation. If at that point there are conditions of annexations added, then you need 100% consent to those conditions or it goes to an annexation election. But if you had, a whole subdivision that wanted to annex, for instance, and 50% signed the petition and there were no additional conditions to annexation, then that would be sufficient for the town to be able to consider an annexation ordinance.
So under this new wording, somebody could be unwillingly annexed in.
That's correct. You could include a smaller parcel with larger parcels as long as 50% of the owners and more than 50% of the land petition for
Yeah,
annexation.
that's the way the state statute reads.
But you can have a different standard. But yeah, so this would match the state standard.
So we don't have to match it. So I'm just wondering, why is this a good thing? It doesn't seem like a good thing to me.
It just, with having it say 100% of the property owners, it actually precludes the potential for, you could have a property that's owned by 5 siblings and 3 of the 5 siblings want to annex versus not. And then at that point, a property could be annexed by us saying it has to be signed by all 5 or by 100%. It's precluding the options for some other annexations. It's just meeting the state statutes actually kind of provides for a little bit more flexibility for annexations instead of being 100% of the property owners. Yeah, and it either way, you'd still have to bring in a petition to go forward from that standpoint.
I mean, just me personally, I don't see it as a good thing.
any other other thoughts on it?
No, just
Okay.
my opinion that it's just forcing people to annex that don't want to.
Is this anticipated to be a regular occurrence? First of all, because I thought we were going to, we have to make this change anyway to keep it in, with keeping with state statutes, correct?
We do not have to
No,
make
we,
this.
we don't
change.
have to, but this just actually makes it, this actually just makes it clear, and actually easier by going with the state statutes from that standpoint.
Is this likely to come into play very often?
Not likely,
I
to be
thought-
honest.
Yeah, I thought somebody asked that at council, and it was a,
No, this is just, yeah, more of a cleanup item to be in line with state statute.
all right. Anything else on this? Okay,
Okay. Next is amendments to sections 10.29 and 10.932. Just providing clarity that property petition for annexation to the town of Timnath is privately owned. Public property that would be annexed falls under a different criteria outside of this petition requirement. So we've just added the wording of private just to have clarity on that. Next, we have Article 11, revising the definition of family in our code. We're revising this to align with the recently signed House bill prohibiting local governments from basing occupancy on family relationships unless they are tied to a health and safety standard. So this bill actually, I believe, would go into effect on July 1st. So we're just getting ahead of that. So ultimately, just removing any language that would mention anything to be related and is just strictly based on the occupancy for health and safety standards.
we have no choice on this one, correct?
That is correct. This is a new state bill, and it's of statewide nature.
Yeah. Yes. Okay,
Lastly, back to our window signs. So we're just adding a definition. We don't currently have one. As we've mentioned in the past, if they have been brought forward, we reviewed it as a wall sign. However, they haven't always been brought forward. So we're just providing this to have a definition and clarity on this use of sign.
so again, not more than 4x4 or 16 square feet.
Yep.
Is,
That would not need to be added to this.
That-
It just-
Correct, but yes,
okay.
All right, so that is it for Amendment 14.
All right, very good. Any commissioners, any other comments? Back to everything we just heard. Okay, very good. So with that, I need a motion on business item 6A, land use code amendment. Oh, there's a public comment on this. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment on?
We do not.
Very good. Okay, so we'll close the public comment on business item 6A. With that, I'll entertain a motion on land use code amendment number 14 with the condition on signage not to exceed 4x4 or 16 square feet, which I thought needed to be added, unless somebody had a 2x8 signs. That, and council can then spend as much time on it as we did if they wish to change that when it gets to them. All right, do I have a motion to that effect, please?
Motion to approve item 6A, land use code amendments number 14.
We're approving it with the amendment.
That's your,
With the amendment.
with the
With the
amendment.
recommendation to
Okay.
add to section 7.6.23 that window signs over 16 square feet in size prohibited except as allowed in those two reference sections.
Okay, that's sufficient. All right, do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded on business item 6A. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? A motion carries on a 5-0 vote. Business item 6B, land use. Does anybody need to take a break before we, this one's not, or is it? it's
These
like-
were not fully discussed at our work session, so we separated them with the anticipation that there could be discussion on each one.
Okay.
So
Well, to my question, does anybody want to take a break, a very quick break before we move on? All right, plunge ahead.
all right. So within our code, we have a section that is for modifying prior approvals. Currently, as it states, the requirement is that 10% of any measurable standard not change. We found that that was a bit vague and hard to actually enforce, especially on items that were changing grading or infrastructure, things that were not a design standard in our code. So we wanted to add language that would allow for different modifications, still aligning with what the standards of the code are, but adding flexibility to allow staff to review those, as some of them are not actually code standards. They may be requirements in our technical criteria manual or within Lucas. So we've removed that the plan does not change more than 10% of any measurable standard on the approved plan. We have actually removed that and added that the plan does not change more than 10% of any design standard, which would fall under anything under 5.7 within the land use code. And that could be plant counts, open space percentage, things of that nature. Upon demonstration that the increase or decrease is appropriate for the proper function of the development. So we would still have to have that conversation to determine whether that it was appropriate for that. The amendment may not reduce the standards below what is required by code. So if someone's looking to reduce their open space requirements, they can do so within that 10%, but they cannot go below what our code allows for. They would have to get a waiver from town council to do so. So there is a element within this that there's still that waiver option, but not an administrative review. Also, this plan does not create more than 10% increase of the building's footprint, and a reduction in that building footprint would be permitted. However, it cannot impact the building's height or residential density. So if they're truly just reducing that building, staff would be comfortable reviewing that as a modification. If ever other items were being impacted, we would have another discussion. The amended plan proposes changes to public improvements and drainage, shall be consistent with the town of Timnath design criteria and Lucas standards. Again, just ensuring that they're not doing anything out of bounds from what we are already requiring. And we are also providing amendments requesting relief beyond the requirements of the code from applicable standards contained in 2915.3, which is that town council waiver. Have to follow that process for approval. And then we also have within this code that there's a posting of the sign. However, it is not included in our table of hearing processes and notice requirements. There is not a public hearing for this. So we are requesting that that notice be removed as these are minor 10% modifications to the code. Or items within the public improvements that would not necessarily impact surrounding development.
How about an example of something, that falls within this overall context?
Yeah, so within the Draley subdivision, there was the request to realign and shift their water meter services, which didn't impact any of the landscaping or actual design of the site, just shifting of those items. They were not actually a 10%. It would be hard to quantify that as a 10% measurable standard. Is it the number of taps being shifted, the length that they're being moved, different things like that, that didn't necessarily impact the development per se, but kind of got caught up in this section here. So this just adds the flexibility and clarity that staff can review these things without having to determine whether it is a measurable standard per se.
Questions? Okay.
All right. Similarly, we are amending the section for administrative plats. Currently, the code reads that the boundaries of 10 or fewer lots are to be changed. Anything greater than that would then kick it to a full major subdivision review. So staff is ultimately wanting to ensure that these proposed lot line adjustments are conforming with the code, while also avoiding lengthy review timelines for things that are just truly shifting the lot lines. They are not impacting any other approved plan within the development. It just could be that there is a new product type that does not necessarily fit the approved lot line dimensions. And so this would allow staff to review that without having to go through the entire process when truly it is just the lot lines and not landscape plans, construction drawings, anything else that is being impacted. So in order to do so, we have removed that first section of 10 or fewer lots and stated that it must continue to comply with the standards of this code. And then lastly, that the proposed lot line adjustments will not require an amendment to other previously approved plan sets, construction drawings, landscape plans. And so again, they would still have to fall in line with whatever dimensional standards that they were approved in, just modifications to that lot line.
Questions? Anybody? Matt? All right.
All right. Lastly, we are on the buffer yard requirements. So we have tried to structure this table in a way to create a base standard that would be attainable by all development, but would also allow staff flexibility and discretion to require greater buffering if there are adverse impacts on adjacent properties. And so ultimately, we have scrubbed the table and come up with the proposed buffer requirements here. So as you'll see, a lot of these things that are similar uses, we are not requiring that there be a minimum buffer standard. However, staff could review a plan that moves forward, and if determined that there's adverse impacts of that, we could impose some sort of buffering or requests for buffering on those lots. We have then gone to 30 feet for any use that is abutting a regional commercial, residential to regional commercial and industrial. So that would be the largest that we have proposed. However, with that, we are enhancing our standards within those. So we will still have two options within the buffer yards available. In our previous, or in our current code, those two did not necessarily align to create the same screening and also be at the same cost for the developer. So we wanted to ensure that both options, one was not chosen to get a lesser cost there, so they're both at the same. So ultimately, these would be the standards at the minimum for these buffer yard 20s, as well as the buffer yard 30. And in reviewing this, staff is also looking to impose some or provide some footnotes to that table for added flexibility again and review for staff to ensure that the buffering and screening is being handled appropriately per each use. So I'm adding the language that the development proposals adjacent to a property within the town's GMA in Larimer or Weld County shall provide a buffer yard based on the existing future land use designation established in the town's comprehensive plan for adjacent county properties. This land use designation could be evaluated by staff from the permitted zoning districts, as we discussed earlier, for appropriate buffering between potential uses. So depending on what that designation is, if it's a residential, we could potentially look at that as a lower intensity to create more buffering, or if it is commercial or industrial, we could look at that being the highest use that could potentially go on that property. Buffering requirements for uses that propose higher intensities shall be subject to the discretion of town planner and shall be identified, evaluated, and acceptably mitigated through the imposition of reasonable standards. Buffer considerations to be accounted for during the major subdivision process and identified during sketch plan review. So at the earliest stages, staff could have that as a note or have different areas or tracks provided within plating to ensure that there is adequate buffering to potentially adverse uses. If another screening buffer is required by the land use code, the greater requirement shall apply. Screening and buffering shall be met on the property of the higher intense use. Properties that are to upzone shall provide additional buffering to meet minimum standards of the table we just showed. Additional buffering may be required as mentioned in note 2. And then lastly, the town planner may approve site designs with alternative compliance where the deviation is a minimum needed for effective site design or otherwise mitigated by enhanced site elements. So there are other ways that could be done in design to help transition between uses and create these buffers that may not necessarily all be done by the actual landscaping. So there's other elements that as staff we can review.
Chad, excuse me, back up 1 second. Can you go back? So in the third bullet point down, just as an example, they identified during the sketch plan review, is that when the sketch plan is reviewed by planning commission, or is that when the staff reviews the sketch plan prior to getting to us?
It would be with the approval of that sketch plan. So likely could be a note on the plan stating that there needs to be buffering if they're having separate tracks that are to be different zones, different things like that. Or it could actually be done that there is tracks designated just as open space to create that buffering at that time.
In other words,
Or called out on the
you would
sketch
call
plan.
it to our attention at the time we have here's as this particular circumstance.
Yeah, so
applied
staff
during-
would like to address that as early on as possible to ensure that that is the known requirement.
All right. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
And then in doing this update, I reviewed all adjacent areas within the town of Timnath municipalities and what their buffer yard requirements were. So these numbers are the maximum or the largest buffer width that is required for development. These are often for industrial uses next to, say, residential, things like that. As you see now, we are quite above that. We are at 60 feet currently for industrial uses next to residential. We're proposing that that be 30 with the additional requirements that staff has discretion to add or require additional screening they see fit. As you see, Town of Windsor is 25, Severance is 25, Wellington is actually, their greatest is 15. Loveland is also at 30 and Port Collins is at 20. So this width is in alignment with the surrounding areas.
I think of the light industrial development up on County Road 5, up on Main Street, the Turner development that appears to be changing anyway. Am I correct? This was an example. At that time, we were pointing out to the residents who live in the county development that's to the north that there's a 60-foot. So now, essentially, if this was going through again, it would only have to be 30 feet, correct?
The minimum would be 30, but we have the ability to, based on that potential adverse impact to those property owners, impose a greater requirement for that and could be in line with what we already told them from the beginning, which was at 60 feet.
We could. So we're not necessarily setting a precedent. We didn't necessarily set a precedent. We still have that right to take that under consideration to the consideration of residents who live nearby.
Well, that one is actually going to be a little bit different because there is the there's the Lake Canal ditch that separates that property from those residents. So just by the virtue of the ditch, they won't be able to meet this criteria from that standpoint. So they'll still have to have a buffer within that, and the ditch easement itself will most likely be 50 feet in itself. So in that one, it'll be a little bit different because they'll still have the distance of that just by the nature of the ditch easement that will be required. But if there wasn't that ditch there, it could have the, 30 feet, but by that, it'd actually be a denser planting from that standpoint than what was previously there. So it would actually provide a little bit more of a buffer from visually and sound, just because it'd be denser planting than what would be allowed within that 60-foot. But yeah, it is a little bit of an oddity just because of that ditch up on Willis Farm.
That was Homestead Estates, as I recall, yeah,
Yep.
and that was certainly to the extent that we couldn't guarantee anything, but
Yeah.
that ditch circumstance, oddity though it was, did add to
Yep.
the buffer. Okay, so, all right, any other questions on this particular?
Yeah, in that same vein, are there any other developments right now that this change might impact?
Not like that would. Other developments are either buffers are known or have already been anticipated for buffers, things like that. Not to the extent from that standpoint. This actually will alleviate some situations to where zonings kind of dictated what the buffers would be, to where we'd have different zonings, but with same use types within that would actually require a buffer that was substantial. When, like for instance, the Riverbend across the street has an R4 and a community commercial zoning designation. So the apartments are actually in two different zoning districts. But by the virtue of the old designation, the apartments that were in the R4 designation to the community commercial would have had to have had a 40 buffer, to where it's, when you're kind of talking the same thing, it's, commercial to resident to multifamily. Why would we have a buffer from that standpoint when it's the same use, just because it's in a different zoning designation? So this actually kind of cleans that up a little bit and makes it actually kind of, I will say, more common sense from that aspect. But from like industrial, the only other industrial we have is over in off of Three Bell over on Goodman, where the self-storage and some of those other uses are. And then there's another ditch and other buffering from within that standpoint. So other than that, this really won't impact anything else in the town.
How would it affect, Kevin? I know there's been a proposal for a hotel over on Harmony, and the residents right behind it have already raised a few concerns. Would that affect the buffer?
That's one of the things where Chad had mentioned that we'd have the ability to look at that and determine if there's an additional buffer needed.
Okay. Fair enough.
So we're not, and put differently, and that's a good example. That'd be interesting. Put differently, we take great pride in having higher standards than surrounding communities. And this is not to demean surrounding communities. This is not by any means lowering our standards that we are so proud of because we have this flexibility to make exceptions.
I would say this doesn't lower the standards, because this actually increases the density within the buffer yard, which is actually probably better use of buffer yard space than just vacant area, just because there's more dense trees that are planted within a smaller area. Like for instance, if it was the 60-foot buffer, you'd have 60 feet in width, but you could have only 10 feet width of planting for, a length of that 60 feet, to where it's just, then at that point, you just have open space that's vacant that doesn't actually provide a buffer. So if anything, this actually enhances our standards, just because it gets denser plantings within an area to actually provide a more useful buffer.
Very good. Sound good? Sound good. Okay. Thanks.
And that is all. If you have any other questions.
Very good. Before we vote, before we entertain a motion, to anybody who says that the land use code should not be a living document, the amount of work, commending the staff, the work session tonight, and everything else that goes after this, certainly belies the the statements of some that it should be a fixed document, and this certainly shows why it is a living document. Very much something I've been impressed with during the various processes that we've gone through down through the years with the land use code. So unless anybody has anything else to add on this 6B, any questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion. We had no amendments on this. I'll entertain a motion on business item 6B, land use code amendment number 15.
Did you want to ask if there were any public comments? It's
Oh, yeah,
not listed
thank
as a
you.
public hearing,
Yes,
but you did for
yes,
14.
Thanks, Carolyn. Lindsay, anybody signed up?
There is no one signed up.
Okay,
for comment.
we will close public comment on this. Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I propose approval of land use code amendment number 15.
Do I have a second?
Stated.
Second.
We have moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Land use code amendment number 15 carries on a 5-0 vote. Reports. Couple things. First of all, our vacancy is posted. The closing is the 17th, I believe. And so we'll stay tuned, as they say, to fill our vacant seat down there. And lastly, from me, thank you again for electing me chair once again. All joking aside, I do appreciate the faith that you have in me and our vice chair here.
And thank you guys for doing it.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I think, right? What do you think? Okay. Staff, anything, commissioners, anything else to add by way of reports? Okay.
Just maybe a point of order, since Jeremy has left his position, do we have one of the alternates fill his former regular position, or how does that all work?
I'll let you all, it does fill the advancement when it comes as approved by council, fills that they would maintain their present term, would they not?
Yeah, so the appointment's being considered at the May 14th to move the alternate to a full-time position. So-
Yeah, that you were asking.
Yeah.
If somebody moves up to a regular commissioner,
Right.
they would continue their present term. They wouldn't?
They would assume that term.
They would assume that term.
So
That's a good point.
if they had just been appointed to planning commission and their term expired, say in 2027, but the seat that they're filling expires in 2025, they are assuming that expiration in 2025.
So somebody runs the chance of in stepping up. That answers that question.
Yep. That's how we've always done it, is you assume that seat's term
Okay.
from that
Thank you.
standpoint.
That makes it clear.
All right. Anything else by way of reports?
I have a question. So it's a long, detailed question.
Oh,
Just
good.
kidding.
Take what time, take whatever
Couple
time
things.
you need. Thank you. Go ahead.
I hadn't been on the website in a while, and I got on there. I saw the new layout of it, which was nice. But one of the things I noticed is the planning commission minutes go back to May 2019. Didn't they go further back before?
There are minutes that go back from that standpoint, but I think from a record keeping on the website, they don't go back past
Okay.
that.
I just thought they did before, but I may be wrong on that.
No, I don't think on the website they went,
Okay.
back, but we have record of them that go beyond that, but just
Yeah.
not on the website.
So the other thing is, in my day job, I made eye contact at the wrong moment and got put in charge of AI for a section of the business, and just didn't know, are we considering any AI tools? Because, I mean, in doing what we do, it's a real pain in the butt sometimes to go back through, first to remember when we brought something up, which I can never do. So I end up having to go from May 2019 forward. you know, it's just something to keep in mind as we look at tools and things like that of, you know, they're all public records, so we can use ChatGPT-4 as is. We don't have to have a secure instance of it. It just, looking up records and things like that, I think would be good for public, and it'd certainly be good for us in our research. And they're, you know, just using a simple chatbot like that is relatively simple.
We will take note of that.
I won't interpret
It would,
that.
it would give you a longer answer if it was an hour ago. Anything else, commissioners? Staff, anything? Scott?
Yeah, Chair, I do have a couple things. First, appreciate all your going into the weeds, as you so to speak. Appreciate your feedback on that. We listened to those comments and appreciate your time doing that. I also appreciate that this is a living document. That's something in my former position that it's very important to make sure that the code is up to date and current. And so work session again to continue on some other items. If there's other things that you see, certainly let us know. I also want to extend an invitation to each of you to reach out to me if you want to meet for a coffee or just chat to understand some of your priorities, expectations from staff. I welcome that to make sure that there is good communication moving forward. And then the last thing, some of you may or may not know, but this is Kevin's last Plan Commission meeting. So I hope you have an opportunity to wish him well on his next chapter. I'll turn that over to Kevin if he chooses to do so. But again, as you know, Kevin's spent a lot of time here in the town, has been a great asset. I'm sorry to lose him because he's a wealth of knowledge, but again, I'm happy for him moving on to his next chapter in his career.
Well, thank you. May we choose Kevin to do so? Do you want to enlighten us what opportunity you have?
No, thanks for that, Scott. So yeah, I am, by the end of this month, I am making my way out of Timnath. I am actually heading up to be the planning director for Spearfish, South Dakota. So not just out of Timnath, but staying in the area. I'm actually heading out of state. So just making a move 5 hours north of here. So it's been a pleasure for the almost decade, especially with you, Phil. You were on when I first started. So yeah, we've spent all this time, and then, you know, the rest of you as well. It's been a pleasure with all of you over the years, but yeah, this is unfortunately bittersweet that it's my last one with y'all.
For us as well. Well, thank you. Appreciate everything you've done. Certainly well deserved, given the 10-year
Appreciate it.
growth, evolution, if you will.
Good luck.
Anything else? And thanks, Scott. Anything else? Very good. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you all.